Iran Daily Briefing, Monday, June 8, 2026. Israel and Iran exchanged attacks on Monday, June 8, in the first such exchange reported since a ceasefire took effect 2 months earlier. France 24, NPR, Al Jazeera and Al Monitor all reported the renewed fire. The exchange links directly to 3 wider threads today: stalled talks between Tehran and Washington, US efforts to contain escalation, and a new formal push over Iran's nuclear facilities at the IAEA. Today's briefing begins with a military and diplomatic development. France 24 reported that Iran and Israel traded strikes early Monday. Al Jazeera reported that missiles were launched toward Israel after Israeli attacks on Beirut. France 24 also reported that President Donald Trump called for restraint and asked Iran to return to the negotiating table. At the same time, Al Monitor reported that a US-prepared draft resolution sent to countries on the IAEA board demands that Iran provide precise information on safeguarded nuclear facilities and grant required the IAEA access. And away from the battlefield, Iran's World Cup participation is now caught up in US-Iran tensions. The BBC reported that Iran's group matches are scheduled in the United States, while Al Monitor and Al Jazeera English reported on match-day travel arrangements and reported visa denials affecting 15 delegation members. Today, the Israel-Iran exchange, Washington's response, the nuclear diplomacy track, the Strait of Hormuz, World Cup access, and a reported Pakistani message to Iran's supreme leader. The top story is the renewed exchange of fire between Israel and Iran. France 24 reported that Israel and Iran exchanged attacks on Monday, June 8. NPR reported that Israel and Iran exchanged missile fire. Al Monitor reported that the attacks were the first such exchange since a ceasefire took effect 2 months earlier. France 24 said, Iran launched missiles at Israel on Sunday night. It reported that air raid sirens sounded in Israel during incoming Iranian missile barrages, and that Israel's military worked to intercept them. Al Jazeera reported that the Israeli army said it intercepted missiles launched from Iran on Monday. The reported trigger was Lebanon. Al Jazeera and France 24 reported the Iranian fire as a response to Israeli strikes on Beirut. Al Jazeera reported that Israel attacked Lebanon's capital and that the attack killed at least 2 people. France 24 described the Iranian missile attack as retaliation for deadly Israeli strikes in Beirut's southern suburbs earlier Sunday. The Times of Israel reported that 10 missiles were fired at northern Israel in response to a strike on Hezbollah in Beirut. France 24 also reported that the Iranian missile attack was the first since a fragile ceasefire took effect in early April. NPR reported that Israel said Iran launched a missile at Israel during a fragile ceasefire. Inside Iran, France 24 reported that a massive blast rocked central Tehran during the hostilities. It also reported repeated explosions in Tehran that were believed to be from air defense systems. Middle East Eye reported that Iranian authorities described explosions in Tehran, Isfahan and Tabriz after the strikes. Middle East Eye carried reports of Israeli strikes or related activity beyond Tehran. Some of those details come through single-source reporting. Middle East Eye reported that the Israeli military said its air force struck several targets at a petrochemical complex in Mashhad. Middle East Eye identified Mashhad as a city in Iran's southwestern Khuzestan province. The same outlet reported that a security official, quoted by Fars news agency, said Israeli forces targeted the Karun petrochemical company and damaged part of the facility. Middle East Eye also reported that Iran's Mehr news agency said air defense systems were activated in and around Kermanshah to counter hostile aerial targets. It reported that an Iranian security official in Isfahan province said Israel carried out a pre-dawn attack on Najafabad with no casualties. And it reported, citing the Associated Press, that Iran closed airspace around Imam Khomeini International Airport after reported Israeli strikes. Those site-specific reports have not been corroborated elsewhere in today's provided intel. On the Israeli side, Middle East Eye reported that the Israeli military said Chief of Staff Eyal Zamir was monitoring ongoing strikes against Iran from an airbase. Middle East Eye also reported that Israeli media said Israel's military targeted more than 10 sites in central and western Iran. It said Walla and the Wall Street Journal, citing an Israeli official, reported that the strikes focused on military targets and weapons systems. Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps made its own claims. Middle East Eye reported that the IRGC announced the launch of Operation Nazar against Israeli military sites. Middle East Eye and Middle East Monitor carried claims from the IRGC that it launched attacks on Israel's Nevatim airbase. Middle East Eye reported that the IRGC said its aerospace force fired missiles at facilities within that base. Al Jazeera reported that Iran and Israel exchanged threats after Tehran launched missiles toward Israel. It also reported that missiles believed to have been fired from Iran toward Israel were seen over Jordan, and that debris was found in Jordan after Iranian missiles aimed at Israel were intercepted. Washington's response was also reported. France 24 said, President Trump called for restraint after hostilities escalated between Iran and Israel. It also reported that Trump asked Iran to return to the negotiating table. Al Jazeera reported that Trump spoke with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in an effort to contain escalation between Israel and Iran. The Times of Israel reported that Trump told Netanyahu not to retaliate after Iran fired missiles at Israel. Al Jazeera reported that Netanyahu is constrained by Trump in his escalation options toward Iran. Al Monitor reported that Trump said Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu does not control U.S. peace talks with Tehran. There are conflicting signals on whether the fighting affects diplomacy. France 24 reported that talks between Iran and the United States had stalled as of June 8. It also reported that nuclear negotiations related to Iran had stalled. Al Monitor reported that Trump said on Sunday that new strikes by Israel and Iran would not affect his administration's peace talks with Tehran. But Al Monitor reported that Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesperson Esmail Baghaei said Monday that the overnight exchanges of fire between Iran and Israel would worsen the diplomatic process with the United States. Al Jazeera reported that Iran warned talks could be stopped if Israel continued to hit Lebanon. France 24 reported that mediation efforts were underway to end the war involving Iran and Israel. Al Monitor reported that weeks of negotiations had sought to bring about a definitive end to the regional war sparked by US and Israeli strikes on Iran on February the 28th. France 24 reported that US President Donald Trump launched Operation Epic Fury against Iran 100 days earlier. NPR reported that the Israel-Iran missile exchange occurred on the 100th day of the US and Israel's war with Iran. France 24 reported that the conflict following Operation Epic Fury had caused more than 7,000 deaths. That figure is not corroborated elsewhere in the provided intel. France 24 also reported that the near closure of the Strait of Hormuz contributed to severe economic disruption during the Iran conflict. The immediate thing to watch is whether any side reports further military action and whether Tehran issues new statements on the future of talks with Washington. First, the nuclear file is moving through a formal diplomatic channel. Al Monitor reported that a US-prepared draft resolution was sent to countries on the IAEA board. The draft text, seen by Reuters and described by Al Monitor, says Iran must provide the IAEA with precise information on safeguarded nuclear facilities in Iran. The same reporting says Iran must grant the IAEA all access required to verify information on nuclear material and safeguarded facilities without delay. This follows yesterday's focus on Iran's claims about attacks on nuclear facilities under safeguards. Taken together, the provided reporting points to two tracks: diplomacy with Washington and a formal push at the IAEA. The thing to watch next is whether Iran, the United States, or the IAEA publicly responds to the draft resolution or its access demands. Second, the Strait of Hormuz remains part of the diplomatic and economic picture. Al-Monitor reported that Iran's ambassador to Moscow was quoted as saying, Monday that the Strait of Hormuz would remain open under new conditions set by Iran and Oman. That follows yesterday's reporting on U.S. military action against Iranian drones over the Strait of Hormuz. Today's new reporting does not add further official detail on that drone incident, but France 24 reported that the near closure of the strait contributed to severe economic disruption during the conflict. The thing to watch next is whether Iran, Oman, or U.S. officials give further detail on the reported new conditions for keeping the strait open. Third, the World Cup issue is now part of the US-Iran file. Al-Monitor reported that Iran's national soccer team arrived in Tijuana early Sunday ahead of 3 World Cup matches in the United States. It also reported that the team landed shortly after 5 a.m. local time after an overnight flight from Turkey. The BBC reported that all of Iran's World Cup group games are scheduled to be played in the United States. The BBC also reported that Iran's players and support staff will have to fly in and out of the United States on match days. Al Jazeera English reported that Iran's ambassador to Mexico, Abul Fazl Pasandide, expressed concern over the reported denial of US visas to 15 members of Iran's 2026 World Cup delegation. This follows yesterday's reporting that Iranian officials said technical staff were denied visas, while the United States said Iranian players could enter the country. The thing to watch next is whether US authorities, FIFA-related officials, or Iran's delegation provide a public update on the reported visa denials and match-day travel arrangements. Fourth, Pakistan's reported diplomatic message remains unconfirmed in today's wider reporting. Al Jazeera English reported that Mohsin Naqvi travelled to Iran to deliver a letter to Iran's supreme leader. This has not been corroborated in the provided intel. That is the full extent of today's sourced reporting on the Pakistan item. The thing to watch next is whether Pakistan or Iran publicly describes the contents of the message or confirms the purpose of the visit. The core sequence is now clearer. France 24, NPR, Al Jazeera, and Al-Monitor reported that Israel and Iran exchanged attacks on Monday, June 8th. France 24 and Al-Monitor reported that this was the first such exchange since a ceasefire took effect 2 months earlier. Al Jazeera and France 24 reported the Iranian fire as a response to Israeli strikes on Beirut. Al Jazeera reported that the Beirut attack killed at least 2 people. France 24 reported that Iran launched missiles at Israel on Sunday night and that Israel worked to intercept incoming barrages. Washington then entered the sequence publicly. France 24 reported that President Trump called for restraint and asked Iran to return to the negotiating table. Al Jazeera reported that Trump spoke with Netanyahu in an effort to contain escalation. At the same time, Al-Monitor reported that a US-prepared draft resolution sent to countries on the IAEA board demands that Iran provide precise information on safeguarded nuclear facilities and grant required the IAEA access. That is the core sequence in today's reporting. In the next 24 to 48 hours, watch 4 items. First, watch for further military claims or official statements after the Israel-Iran exchange. France 24, NPR, Al Jazeera, and Al-Monitor reported that Israel and Iran traded fire on Monday, while the IRGC said, in claims carried by Middle East Eye and Middle East Monitor, that it launched attacks on Israel's Nevatim airbase. Second, watch for any new statement from Tehran on talks with Washington. France 24 reported that US-Iran talks had stalled and that Trump asked Iran to return to the negotiating table. Al-Monitor reported that Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesperson Esmail Baghai said the overnight exchanges would worsen the diplomatic process with the United States. Third, watch for movement on the IAEA draft resolution. Al-Monitor reported that a US-prepared draft sent to countries on the IAEA board demands that Iran provide precise information on safeguarded nuclear facilities and grant the IAEA required access. Fourth, watch for any official clarification on the World Cup access issue. The BBC reported that Iran's group games are scheduled in the United States and that players and support staff will have to fly in and out on match days. Al Jazeera. English reported concern from Iran's ambassador to Mexico over reported US visa denials affecting 15 members of Iran's delegation. Today's episode covered the renewed Israel-Iran exchange, Washington's effort to contain escalation, the IAEA draft resolution, the Strait of Hormuz, World Cup access, and a reported Pakistani message to Iran's supreme leader. We'll be back tomorrow with the next Iran Daily Briefing. For full written briefs and source-backed updates, check out the Iran Brief on Substack. Paid members can build multi-country monitoring across the countries they care about, with personalized briefings delivered automatically.